Again, I want to thank everyone who's here right now. Thank you for joining us tonight to talk a little bit about our upcoming 2024 reconstruction of Grand Avenue. So, as I said earlier, we've got Chris and Jeanette here to help out with any questions about other things. But otherwise, I can also answer just about any question we've had here today. So, feel free to kind of any big or small question. Feel free to chime in anytime during the chat or at the Q&A session with your microphone. But otherwise, I'd ask you to keep your mic muted until the end of the presentation. All right. So to start real quick, a quick overview of, and now someone jumps in. Hi there. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We just started the presentation, so you haven't missed anything. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So I just really want a quick overview of the project location. So as you can see here, the project will be running from Fairview Avenue to Snelling Avenue. All right, we've got a lot of people coming in now. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming in tonight. We just got the presentation started, so question and answer will be at the end. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll have a voice availability at the end of this meeting, at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Anyway, so going back. So the project extent. So the project extent will be on Grand Avenue and run from Fairview Avenue to Snelling Avenue. The project does currently include Fairview Avenue intersection, but not the Snelling Avenue intersection. However, today we actually have applied to MnDOT to get some funding potentially to include the Snelling Avenue intersection into the project scope. We won't hear back from MnDOT until later in summer to know for sure if we did get the money or not. So for today, we are just looking at it, not including the Snelling Avenue intersection, but something to note that it may include that intersection as well in the future. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the project need and goals. So the project need is really four kind of main needs here. So the first need is low pavement quality is present throughout the project extent. I'm sure some of you, if you've driven or walked or been around this part of Grand Avenue, you remember that the area on Grand Avenue through McAllister College was particularly bad, and so that had a thin resurfacing project done a couple of years ago, but we're now coming through to kind of do a full reconstruction of that. So low pavement quality is pretty evident throughout the entire project extent. Another project need through this area is very high pedestrian activity. So we've got McAllister College, we've got Ramsey Junior High, we've got plenty of high traffic businesses, restaurants, hardware stores, paint stores, things like that have a lot of pedestrian activity that go in and out and frequent the corridor pretty much all day and in the evening. There are some pedestrian crossing needs at intersections, and notably those mid-block crossings within the McAllister College campus. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And finally, there's quite a bit of aging underground utilities and other infrastructure below the surface of the street that really hasn't been touched in a long time, and it's really time for to get these utilities updated and replaced. And with this project, it presents a great opportunity to do so. So some project goals that we have put together for this project are to improve the safety along the corridor, with really an emphasis on pedestrian crossing safety, specifically through McAllister and by Ramsey Middle School. Upgrade and modernize aging infrastructure. Improve the built environment to really better serve Grand Avenue businesses. Improve the transit user experience through here. We've got the Route 63 high frequency route that runs down Grand Avenue. Looking to balance mode share to encourage non-automotive trips along and to the corridor. So some of our big goals in the comprehensive plan, the climate action plan, our pedestrian and bicycle plans is really to encourage non-automotive trips throughout the city, and these larger projects are one of those ways that we can kind of help to push those the more multimodal aspects of our transportation system. And another project goal that I think is important here to note is to really improve the interaction placemaking through McAllister's College's campus. So one thing that frequent discussions with McAllister College is that the right-of-way of Grand Avenue initially was built for a streetcar, and so an only streetcar, and it was kind of vehicles and trucks and everything. Those were added later, after the campus is already kind of built out. And so one of the things we want to look at too is potentially improving that, again, that interaction and placemaking in the campus itself. Talking about that, a little bit of the corridor history real quick here. So Grand Avenue's original use again was for a streetcar line that ran all the way down Grand Avenue through this section of the corridor and through McAllister's campus, as they donated that right away. Um, and they once that streetcar line was established, businesses, residents, a lot of people started moving into the area. As you can see here, it's an image from about the 1920s or so. You see some development here on McAllister College's campus with those homes more to the north, and you see some of those businesses again coming up along Grand Avenue, right there, kind of in the middle of the picture here. Obviously, the streetcar lines were all discontinued in the 1950s, and Grand Avenue was converted to a general traffic roadway, including that bus route and other features as well. And so through the years, the Grand Avenue itself through McAllister's campus has kind of evolved from an original streetcar route to a general traffic street that you'd see the rest of Grand Avenue to kind of what we see today with that kind of that constructed and landscape median that runs through the campus to give it a little more of a campus feel, different from the rest of Grand Avenue. Some of the most recent work, though, as I mentioned, there was a thin mill and overlay in 2020 done on through McAllister's campus from Snelling Avenue to McAllister Street. Additionally, that center median that we know today through the campus was installed in the mid to late 2000s, paid for by McAllister, installed by the city's Public Works Department. And also another effort that has taken place recently is Metro Transit completed its Better Bus Stop Improvement Program, which saw some bus stop changes along the corridor, including at Fairview Avenue. It also saw the Wheeler Avenue stations stops consolidated to Cambridge and Fairview Avenue to kind of have a few less bus stops through the corridor. So today, through this project corridor, we have 3 stops eastbound and 3 stops westbound. Some early project data, just a general idea here. So the project construction year will be 2024. And a description of the project is it's a full depth reconstruction, which means we will be kind of taking everything out, roadway, sidewalks, everything, and putting it back in through this reconstruction process. That includes roadway surface, that includes curb and gutters, that includes street lighting replacement, that includes reconstruction of sidewalks and boulevards, that includes underground utility replacement, and right now that also includes signal replacement at Fairview Avenue as well. Those signals are getting pretty aged. Project budget is just under $7 million, 6.99 million, which again includes that signal replacement at Fairview. And the project length is about 2,600 feet, or about half a mile, 4 city blocks from Snelling to Fairview. Existing conditions overview. So we've kind of mentioned some of these existing conditions, but we'll go through them again here. So Grand Avenue is considered a main street in our city. It's technically classified as a minor arterial with the state and federal government. Those have some connections and some requirements that we'll need to consider as we do our redesign. But I think for most purposes, that's not the most important information, but it is something to note. Again, Route 63 is a high frequency bus route that runs through down Grand Avenue, including those 3 stops east and westbound at Fairview, Cambridge, and Snelling Avenue. Additionally, the A-line stops are located along the southern leg of Grand Avenue and the Snelling Avenue intersection on Snelling Avenue. That's the arterial bus rapid transit route that runs up Snelling Avenue from 46th Street Station in Minneapolis to Rosedale Mall. Average daily traffic, the last count we have is in 2017, which saw 7,779 vehicles through this part of Grand Avenue per day. One item to note for this traffic count is it has been trending down over the years. So that average daily traffic count is actually above 10,000 in the 90s and early 2000s, and kind of subsequent counts have seen that traffic count kind of lower, less and less and less. Now we're down to around 7,709 vehicles a day. Pavement condition, as noted earlier, pretty much poor throughout the project extent, anywhere from 13 to 51, and those numbers are out of 100. So as you can imagine, 13 would be pretty low on the totem pole for condition of pavement. And so that is one of those main reasons why we're coming here to get this section of Grand Avenue to reconstruct first. There's a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit through the area. The city has implemented their citywide kind of ordinance that lowers speed limits on their arterial streets and on their local streets. And Grand Avenue now is 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. Additionally, as mentioned multiple times, there's considerable and aged underground utilities throughout this section of Grand Avenue. Some of these utilities could potentially run 50, 60, 70 years old, and so they're definitely in need of update. I want to talk a bit about some corridor crash data. So part of the process of collecting data in the early part of these reconstruction projects is to understand where crashes are happening in our corridor and what are the results of those crashes. As you can see here, the data we've got from 2011 to 2021, we've seen about 151 crashes through this section of Grand Avenue in the last 10 years, pretty considerable amount. And of those 151, 7 of them have involved a pedestrian and 3 have involved a bicycle. Unfortunately, one of those pedestrian crashes resulted in a fatality at Fairview Avenue in 2015, and 4 of those crashes resulted in injuries, with two of those 4 injury crashes involving pedestrians. And so we never really want to see anyone hurt or killed on our roadways. And so this is very important data as we move forward, and we kind of look at what kind of changes we want to do in this roadway to make sure that, people aren't being killed on our roadways. Another note that is not on this map here is that Grand Avenue has also been identified as a roadway in the city of St. Paul in our safety plan that should be marked for infrastructure improvements to increase the safety throughout the corridor. And so that is part of the process that we're looking through this as well. Just want to talk a bit about existing land use through this section. So we recently had our 2040 comprehensive plan adopted a few years ago. And part of that is looking at existing land use that you see on the left here, and what our planned land use would be on the right here. And so existing land use is pretty mixed, as we got obviously a lot of institutional here for Ramsey Junior High and McAllister's campus, but we also have plenty of commercial, medium density residential, smaller apartment buildings, duplexes, things like that, kind of surrounded by more single family residential as you get further away from Grand, either north or south. If you look at our plan map, a lot of that stays institutional with McAllister College, obviously, and we also have mixed use corridor pretty much throughout the extent of Grand Avenue, and this section of Grand Avenue is no different. One note, our plan maps are generally less they have little less detail on them, just because we like to keep those keep those plan maps just a little more flexible than the existing map, where we can kind of more concretely identify what a use is on a certain parcel, rather than in the future we want more of a kind of a flexible land use going forward. So just the takeaway from this is really, Grand Avenue is a mixed use corridor, a lot of pedestrian activity, big institutional users along the corridor as well, and just something we really should be considering as we redesign our roadways as well. Right, real quick, I want to talk about existing cross sections. So really, through this section of Grand Avenue, there's 2 distinct cross sections. First, the McAllister cross section, the not McAllister cross section. First, I'll talk about the not McAllister cross section. So that is from Fairview to McAllister Avenue, or McAllister Street, I should say, which is a typical Grand Avenue configuration, a 3-lane street with parking on both sides of the roadway. So that includes a dedicated center left turning lane that allows for vehicles to turn left in driveways or into adjacent local roadways. And through this section of Grand, there's multiple driveways, and those driveways are primarily found on the north side. However, there are a few driveways also found on the south side. There's an existing marked crossing at Ramsey Junior High, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail in a second. There's also multiple businesses along the stretch of Grand Avenue, which utilize the right-of-way for seating, product display, unloading of trucks, things like that. So there's really a lot going on. It's a very electric kind of part of the corridor, where you've got people walking, cars driving, trucks unloading, buses coming and going. You've got a lot of stuff going on through this corridor. The curb to curb width, so that would be from where cars parked to where cars park on either side. It's about 56 feet, so that's a roadway width. And the total right of way, which includes roadway and sidewalks and boulevard, gets us about 80 feet right away. And that, again, is pretty typical throughout the entirety of Grand Avenue, and is really something that, as we kind of look to redesign this part of this part of Grand Avenue, potentially could have impact on other parts of Grand Avenue if what happens here is successful. The other very distinct section is through McAllister's campus, from McAllister Street to Snelling Avenue. This is just a 2-lane street with left turning facilities at intersections, but you have that pretty nice landscape center median. This is an atypical configuration for Grand Avenue. This is very specific to McAllister College. as it does cut directly through McAllister College. So you have residence halls to the north where all the students live, and on the south you've got lecture halls, administration, athletic facilities, other things like that to the south. So you have pretty frequent kind of traveling of pedestrians going from north to south across Grand Avenue here. Includes that landscape meeting as mentioned earlier, installed by Public Works at the college's request. You have 3 mid-block crossings through the section that were put together when the median was installed. However, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about those particular crossings. Otherwise, you have a 14-foot drive lane through the section, really the most narrow that we can make drive lanes when they have no other coordinating parking lanes or bike lanes or things like with that. We have special vehicles that need to get through the city, fire trucks, ambulances, that 14 feet, they need that kind of space to get through. Total right of way here is the same as other parts of Grand Avenue, 80 feet. However, the curb to curb width, including that median, is just 36 feet through the section, so considerably shorter than other parts of Grand Avenue for people crossing the street. Real quick before we talk about those cross sections and some of those areas a little more in depth, I want to talk about kind of what engagement activities have taken place so far to date. So Public Works staff has really been extensively engaging stakeholders since March of this year. So the last couple of months, we've been going out to the community and having some early conversations before the open house tonight. We've been working closely with MnDOT as they do have a close adjacent project on Snelling that they have planned. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The discussions have been held with them and will be continue to be held throughout the year and next year as construction approaches. Been working very closely with McAllister College and their High Winds Fund, which is their philanthropic arm and their neighborhood organization arm. We have multiple meetings with McAllister staff, and we will continue to coordinate with them throughout this process. Additionally, we held a pop event on campus on April 27th before the students let off for the school year. And we're able to get out there and talk to a lot of students about how they think about Grand Avenue and how they use the street today. Additionally, staff went to a McAllister staff neighborhood update that they held internally on May 25th to again give a little overview of this project. Over on Ramsey Junior High, again, multiple meetings have been held with school staff, and there will be continuing coordination throughout this project. The Public Works staff held an on-site observation on May 11th to observe how pickup and drop-off worked at the Ramsey School during those times of hectic kind of parents are dropping their kids off, picking them up, kids are coming to school. So got out there and just observed that for a morning and an afternoon. Additionally, staff met with a parent-teacher organization meeting on May 19th and presented and got some feedback from that organization on May 19th. Additionally, staff went out and talked to corridor businesses last week. So in coordination with the District Council and the Grand Avenue Business Association, GABA, on-site outreach occurred on May 26th, include a small pop-up table and going door to door to each business to kind of introduce and get some contact information for those businesses if they have any particular needs or questions with Public Works staff. Additionally, I've been coordinating with Metro Transit with multiple meetings with Metro Transit staff, and we'll continue our coordination with them as well. And then, of course, today we have our open house, which included mailers sent out to all residencies and property owners within 500 feet of the project extent. A few notes on what we've heard so far. So some key points of focus have come from engagement to date. Really overall, one of the things we hear pretty frequently about this corridor is we do see very high vehicle speeds. Obviously, not all vehicles are speeding through a section, but when we do see vehicles speeding through Grand Avenue, they can get pretty fast and they can get pretty dangerous. And so that is something that's really been a frequent concern for many residents and pedestrians on the corridor. These vehicle speeds are too high and really unsafe for kind of what's going on in this corridor. Road width has also been noted to be wider than is necessary to really accommodate existing vehicle needs. So again, we've got that cross section for 2 parking lanes, 2 through lanes, and 1 turn lane. 56 feet is pretty wide for that kind of configuration, and so that is something that's been noted through district council meetings and through just resident feedback as well. Sidewalk width, on the other hand, is in some places inadequate for business patio seating, for instance, or product display, and the high pedestrian traffic that you see from some of these businesses. We actually have some pictures of what that looks like in a second. Additionally, crossing at any intersection for many does not feel very safe, especially with those high vehicle movements and smaller pedestrian space. And one final big note that we have been hearing about, I think city in general, but then this project as well for some specific reasons, is tree impact from this project, and really survivability of trees along the corridor is a big concern, I would agree, of all St. Paul residents and Public Works, and specifically along this corridor as well, as I'm sure all of you are aware of some of the ash trees closer to Fairview having to be cut down in the last couple of years and really leaving a pretty bare area there at that Grand Avenue there. So that's definitely something that we will be concerned about. We will be taking it into consideration very, very seriously as we move through this design and redevelopment process. Specifically, some feedback we've heard from McAllister campus, students, staff, and visitors. Current crossing situation is really not ideal for students or anyone really crossing the street, as it can be confusing for both pedestrians and motorists about who has right of way, who doesn't have right of way. There currently is big signs up that say pedestrians, don't have right of way through the mid-block sections, but the sidewalk paths tend to lead you to those areas to cross, and so it's a confusing situation, I think, for motorists and for pedestrians crossing this area, and leads to occasional yielding, but not really consistent yielding. But on the flip side, the existing median that is constructed there really works well for everyone, both aesthetically. It looks nice, so people really like the way it looks and how it looks on the roadway, and it does work to slow vehicles somewhat, having a middle kind of barrier there to kind of give people a visual cue that you're moving now into McAllister's campus, and there's really a different kind of expectation as you move through there. So vehicles do tend to move slower through the section. However, yielding is still pretty spotty for anyone trying to cross in those kind of mid-block areas. Ramsey Junior High, we've heard a considerable amount about Cambridge Street crossing, and that it's inadequate for students crossing. It's not really safe. There's a couple signs and some faded paint there today. However, it doesn't really induce vehicles or encourage them to yield for anyone crossing, and especially students who are generally tend to be shorter than an adult human, so harder to see for vehicles as they move forward. So really vehicle yielding isn't consistent, and those vehicle speeds have been noted to kind of pick up on Grand. Actually, as they leave McAllister's campus, they tend to speed up as that roadway gets wider and it seems a little more open for vehicles to move faster. And so that's one of the things we've been hearing about quite a bit, and something we've actually been seeing in action as well. Also, another note, as I mentioned, we did go out there and observe pickup and drop off times for McAllister, and they can really cause some quite long vehicle queuing and some unsafe driving behavior from parents before they drop their kids off, whether they're getting out of that small parking lot on Grand and Cambridge there, and they're taking left turns, and it's a very tight area with a lot of vehicles at once, and it can create some dangerous situations, especially for children, but for anyone who's really in that area at those times. So that kind of leads us into some key design questions as we move forward through the year. And first, we're talking about specifically pedestrian crossings here. So first, I'm going to talk about that Cambridge crossing since we just mentioned that. So again, that crossing is adjacent to Ramsey Middle School. It is marked and signed. There are painted kind of areas that would potentially be considered bump outs. So bump outs are the idea that you extend the curb area on the intersections to allow for pedestrians to cross shorter crossing distances. There was a study in 2013 done by Public Works with the school, which actually recommended curb bump outs, but at the time funding wasn't available for those, and so that the kind of compromise was to paint and put some plastic bollards. Those are little plastic things you see in the street in some areas that delineate areas that cars shouldn't be. As you can see from this image here, those bollards didn't last very long, and the funding really wasn't there to continue to keep putting them up, and so now it's just a similar intersection you'd see anywhere with some paint and signs on it. Additional note for Cambridge Street is it's also identified as a bicycle boulevard in our bicycle plan, and so that is something that we will also be considering as we look to some alternatives in the future for this intersection. But safety is definitely something we will be looking at for that Cambridge Street crossing intersection specific here. The other crossings that we're kind of looking at a little more in depth, of course, is at McAllister campus mid-block crossings. So there is some issues with the American Disabilities Act, specifically on these mid-block crossings where you don't have any sort of ramps that would allow for someone in a wheelchair or otherwise mobily impaired that would be able to cross the street on these mid-block areas. And in fact, there are signs that even say if you're in a wheelchair, you should go to one of the two intersections if you want to cross Grand Avenue. I have heard from some people who aren't wheelchairs actually the difficulty of going down to an intersection and actually getting across in a wheelchair, even at some of those formal intersections too. So that's definitely one of the things we'll be looking at as we move through this area of Grand Avenue. These crossings aren't marked. Again, vehicles are not legally obligated to yield to pedestrians, and the signs kind of reiterate that. However, there is some some yielding that goes on here, which creates a kind of a less than clear situation for pedestrians and drivers. The landscape is raised and the median is raised and landscaped, and it looks nice. And that is something that we'll also hopefully be retaining throughout this process. Again, that median is installed at the behest of McAllister College. Other design questions that we'll be considering, I think, as we move forward here. We'll look on the right here, the Grand Avenue sidewalk width, as you can see in this image here over by French Meadow, it can get pretty narrow. I was out here last week, took this picture. It can get pretty narrow when you have your seating areas, you have product display, you've got, planters for nice plant displays and things like that, and you need room for pedestrians to walk here. As you can see here, it's a very tight fit. This is with no one sitting in these chairs. So if these chairs are out, you can imagine it's even tighter fit for pedestrians. And so that's something that I think we'll be looking to address as we move into redesigning this area to maybe potentially provide a little more breathing room for both pedestrians and for other uses on the sidewalk area, especially in some of these busy business dominated areas. These tight areas really also reduce pedestrian comfort along the roadway. So the closer you are to vehicles moving, especially if they're moving faster, just the less comfortable it feels to be a pedestrian in an area. And additionally, the narrow boulevard, so the boulevard's about 6 feet throughout Grand Avenue, is not optimum for tree health. So 6 feet is kind of our minimum we look for to provide for tree planting, but we hope to, in some cases, provide up to 8 feet, as our forestry department has mentioned, to make sure that the trees in our boulevards stay as healthy as they can and they can really live their full lives and look as good as we really want them to be. And so that is also something that's going to be considered as we move forward. On the other side, Grand Avenue's roadway width is very wide. As you can see from this image here provided from the district council to me early this year, you can see that kind of dark area in the center of the roadway. That's where you see cars traveling through the roadway. And you see this light area between parked cars and that darker area where the cars travel is pretty significant distance. We're talking 5-6 feet potentially between where moving traffic is and where parked cars are. And so that does indicate that there's potentially some extra space here in this roadway that is not being used and potentially could be used for something else. These wide straight roadways, they really encourage high vehicle speeds. This is something that we know as a profession, and really, the wider a roadway is, the wider a lane is, the more comfortable someone in a motor vehicles feels moving faster. And so if we're kind of looking at a more mixed use area of the city, is this really something that's appropriate for this kind of area? This also discourages yielding for pedestrians, which as it limits vehicle sight lines. As you can see here, if you're driving on the Grand Avenue, if pedestrians way in the corner there at Cambridge and there's parked cars, it could be almost impossible to see them until you're at the intersection. So that is something we're also looking to, again, potentially make changes as we move forward. This also creates long crossing distances for pedestrians, and as especially Cambridge area here, where you got children, we potentially have elderly residents, we potentially have disabled residents who require more time to cross the street. And so the wider roadway is the longer it is to cross the street and exposes you to motor vehicle traffic. Also, it's the way Grand Avenue is designed today, it's really not in line with modern roadway design standards. We really like to use all the space that we have on these roadways and to narrow lanes and to encourage or discourage high speeds from vehicles through, especially mixed use corridors like Grand Avenue. So right now I want to talk about the project timeline. So right now we're still kind of this phase 1 of engagement, which is really running from beginning of this year through June, so to the end of June of this year. So includes general opinions and experiences on current conditions in Grand Avenue. So we're really soliciting kind of how you feel about the street today, what works today, what doesn't work today, what would you like to see in the future? These kind of more basic questions for the corridor. So January to April really include a lot of those stakeholder conversations as I outlined earlier. April, we opened the survey and online engagement tool. Some of you have probably already interacted with those. We've gotten about 400 survey responses and another 100 or so responses from our interactive map. So we've got tons of engagement already and tons of great information from everyone. So that's really good to see. In May, we also had those in-person events, McAllister Campus, Grand Ave Vistas. June, it should say open house number 1, June 1st. We're actually in June. And then by the end of June, so at the end of this month, we will finish phase 1 engagement. So once this month ends, we'll close kind of these opening surveys and interactive maps. And we will then we'll take all that data we've gotten from all the different engagement we've done from tonight, from the surveys, from all the maps. We'll aggregate that data. We'll summarize that data. We'll create we'll publish a summary document that kind of outlines what we've heard throughout this entire process, and what that can mean as we move forward for redesign. You can see here, we've got some of these stakeholder conversations that we've talked about earlier. Talked with the District Council Transportation Committee in March. We've talked with the McAllister POP event in April, that PTO meeting in May. Again, another POP event on Grand in May, and other agency partners that we've talked to as well. Moving on to phase 2. So phase 2 will tentatively planned from July to November engagement. So this phase of engagement will see staff producing alternatives that for redesign of the street. And those will be vetted internally in July or so, July to August. We'll go through some of these on our side to make sure that everything works with these different requirements that we have with the state and federal government. And then we'll move on in September. We'll publish there'll probably be 3, 4, 5 different alternatives that potentially Grand Avenue could look like. They could include, wider sidewalks or medians throughout the intersection, or curb extensions at intersections. There's a lot of different potential possibilities here. So I don't want to limit that at all, but those will be presented in September. And once that rolls around, we'll go out to district council again. We'll talk with district council about these potential alternatives. We'll get their feedback. We'll get what they like, what they don't like. And then we'll also hold another open house similar to this, where we'll be presenting those alternatives and soliciting your feedback about what you think works, what doesn't work with some of these potential alternatives for Grand Avenue. Following that, the preferred alternative will be formulated from all this public feedback and from our internal discussions. And we'll move to have City Council review that final design and sign off on the concept design by the end of this year or early next year. And then final design will take place in 2023, which will have city staff create construction designs. Chris will be doing that, creating construction designs in 2023, and then that'll move us to where the project will be beginning in construction season 24, and the plan is to have that all done, wrapped up within one construction season in 2024, to hopefully limit some of these impacts that we could see. Speaking of some of these impacts, so 2024 will be a busy year for this part of town. So we'll have our Grand Avenue reconstruction going through, again, from Snelling to Fairview Avenue. Be obviously done by St. Paul Public Works, but at the same time, MnDOT will be doing a mill and overlay project, so that essentially will have them resurface Snelling Avenue from St. Clair to Grand Avenue. That'll include some pedestrian improvements as well, some crossing areas. Those haven't been finalized yet, but MnDOT will be publishing what that'll look like soon on their project page. So I won't speak for them what that'll look like the final result, but that will be going on at the same time that we'll be doing ours. The mill and overlay for Snelling Avenue will be a much less intensive process than what we'll be doing on Grand Avenue, and so the impacts from that project will be certainly less than what our project will be, but they will be occurring, simultaneously, and so it'll be something to note. Finally, also Ramsey Junior High is undergoing a very expensive and big renovation effort. I think it's somewhere around $80 million renovation effort for the whole building from 2023 to 2025. They indicated to me that they'll be doing most of their remodeling efforts in the summer of those years to kind of limit their impact on student activity in the falls and springs. So again, that is something that will be going on as well to the area. And we will be closely coordinating with MnDOT and St. Paul Public Schools to really ensure disruptions in 2024 are manageable for residents, visitors, and businesses on Grand Avenue. But of course, we will also be updating everyone about what's happening and when it's going to be happening as we move forward. Just know that these will be going on at the same time, so just something to note as we move forward. So with all that said, it's a lot of information. Thank you for hearing me drone on for a little bit. So I just want to outline some of these known issues, concerns that run along the segment of Grand Avenue, and then I'll open it up to questions and comments from anyone about this project. So some of these known issues, again, pedestrian crossing facilities, general roadway safety is another big issue with an emphasis on the pedestrian safety. Another one, business loading and right-of-way use through the area. What businesses need through the right-of-way, whether that's pedestrian improvements or street improvements. Ramsey Middle School's circulation patterns, Route 63 bus accommodation. Those are kind of some of the big ones I think we're looking at through this area. But with that said, I'd like to open it up to anyone to if there's any additional concerns we should be evaluating or addressing, any additional opportunities which maybe we have missed or aren't seeing that we should be exploring on Grand Avenue, any expectations or needs, or any other questions or comments. If you would, there is a feature where you can raise your hand. Looks like Chip has already got that going. But we do have a few chat ones. So I'm going to go through the chat ones first, and then I'll get the raised hands after that. So Chip, just keep your hand up, and anyone else wants to ask a question, I will get to you as soon as I get through some of these written comments and questions first. So first we got Heather. She says, speaking of safety, first responder vehicles require sufficient road width to use Grand Avenue to access emergencies. That's true. And I did touch on that a little bit about the area of McAllister College, where that 15-foot, 14-foot cross section there for the through lanes. That's pretty much the minimum that fire and emergency services will like to see those roadways get minimized to. And so anything you'll see is you're probably not going to see any more narrow than that, because that's kind of our bare minimum to getting fire trucks and first responders through. But that is a good point, Heather. I agree. And we got one from Julie here. Julie asks, would it be possible to increase sidewalk size and keep parking? So from some of our early looks at the roadway width, I do believe there is definitely opportunities potentially to increase some of that sidewalk width without actually losing any parking. Some more recent projects we've done in the city have seen us have narrowed some of our through lanes to 11 feet with 8 to 9 feet of parking next to that, and that's kind of in our street design menu as well. And so that would, if we hypothetically narrowed a roadway through lane to 11 feet and a parking lane to 9 feet, that would potentially open up 6 to 7 feet of area for sidewalks and boulevard space to be widened throughout this corridor. And that's certainly a potentiality that we'll be looking through as well. We got a next question is, what are the considerations for traffic being moved to Lincoln Avenue during this project? Chris, do you have any feedback again about any potential detours through this project, or is it still a little too early to, I think, say on what specific detours will be happening?
Yeah, you nailed it on. We're very early on as to what the actual cross section is going to be, and that will dictate somewhat of how we construct it. Any type of detours, staging plan, accommodations for access is all going to be determined fairly late in our design process and into construction. We have to be flexible to allow for these considerations while trying to identify and we know McAllister and Ramsey School has some needs, obvious needs that we'll try to incorporate, but there's going to be also flexibility in working with the property owners, business owners, and everybody else that uses the area that we won't be able to say anything for a good measure of time.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so I will open up to some hands. Chip, you've had your hand up for a little bit here, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with this app, so I'm having a hard time. One of my questions, you had a land use map of current and then projected or planned. What happened to Ramsey Junior High on the planned one?
Thanks, Chip. So good question. So one of the things about future and existing land uses, so when we do our future land use, so I'm not a land use planner, so I'm gonna just, it's pretty basic here, but Ramsey Middle School is still there. However, our future land use designations again are much more condensed. There's fewer of them, and so generally K through 12 schools are just included under that general urban neighborhood designation, and they aren't included as institutional. I can't tell you the intricacies of why that is, but that's just how that is done. So Ramsey Middle School will still be there. Again, they got a big renovation coming. They're planning on being there for a long time. That's just kind of some of the intricacies of specific land use planning that that just kind of lumps in K through 12 schools with just general urban neighborhood.
The legend is so small that we can't see what the yellow and what the red are. Can you explain?
So yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so these are just kind of quick ideas here. But yellow is urban neighborhoods. That's including things like single family homes, duplexes, smaller, less intense land use like that, residential land use like that, and also including schools and other libraries, things like that. And the red one is mixed use, so that includes businesses, retail stores or retail with residential above it. Essentially, is kind of included in that mixed use.
Apartment buildings are yellow if there's no business on the ground floor.
Right, and it depends on the intensity of the apartment buildings too. So some of your bigger major apartment buildings would be probably under a more intense category, but your mid-scale apartment buildings, things from a couple units to 20, 30 units will be under that that yellow one if there's no retail, and if there's retail on the ground floor, then they'll be included in mixed use, or if they're higher intensity, as whether that the exact numbers I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it's all there in the comprehensive plan.
One other question is how well can we count on the accuracy of the timeline for construction and particularly for completing construction?
Good question. I'll defer to Chris. I know the plan is to definitely try and get this in one construction season, but Chris, any follow-up to that?
Nothing. At this point in time, we're very early on, 0% design, and Joseph's doing a lot of good outreach. If we find issues, we try to address them. If it requires us to extend our timeline, we try to provide as much advance notice to our impacted residents and partners as we can. At this point in time, we're looking good, but we are very early on.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm also Rosa Maria de la Cueva Peterson, and I wonder, have you considered having a parking lot like in Edina, near the Edina theaters when they existed,
Right.
A parking ramp, so that we live on Lincoln Avenue and it's very hard to find parking.
You have a lot of overflow from that.
We have a lot of overflow from the businesses, and we love to have the businesses nearby. But I wonder whether a parking ramp is considered in this plan.
Good question. Thank you for the question. I would say, so we are, from Public Works point of view, we are kind of stuck with the right of way. So we have that, where the street is today, that's kind of what we're looking at in this project. The city doesn't actually own any land through this specific area. And so we as a city would have no opportunity to consider adding off-street parking availability. However, there's McAllister has their lot they have for Patagonia and French Meadow up on the corner of McAllister Street and Grand Avenue. Ramsey Junior High has their small little parking lot there at the corner as well. So that is something that, as for this project and Public Works, we don't really have control over. But there is other institutions in the area that do have some of these off-street areas, and I think if there's specific parking issues, I think that's true, and it's tough. But I will say through this project, we aren't envisioning to lose much or any parking space on Grand Avenue. So I guess I could say we're not planning on making it worse in the future. But again, that always is up to land use. If there's more businesses coming in, there might be more people driving in. But the idea, I think, through this project and through St. Paul's kind of whole ideas is to kind of hopefully, as we reconstruct these streets and redesign these streets, we will encourage more people to not drive to these destinations. Maybe they can walk, bike, take transit, other ways to get there. Hopefully that will lessen your burden on Lincoln for parking specifically. But aside from that, through this project, there's no way we can really add parking to the area.
How does that help people who are not able to walk? What is the consideration? I'm sorry to interrupt, but walking is something that's not accessible to every individual. So I have a really hard time listening to this default assumption of, oh, they'll just walk. My sister-in-law has MS. She will never walk again.
Thank you. Good question. So you know,
Every grandparent I have has used a walker before they went into a wheelchair. And I know that, you know, I'm planning to have a child right now. So when I'm 8, 9 months pregnant, my big fat ankles are not going to be very great for walking. But there's a population out there that is federally protected, and there's laws that require we accommodate them if we aren't mindful enough to be considerate in the first place. So besides walking, what are we doing to accommodate those that don't have that option?
thank you for the question. You know, and good question. So, you know, really, I think we shouldn't be thinking of as potentially adding potential options to Grand Avenue as removing options. You know, the street will still function essentially the same as it does today. I think one of the points as we were trying to make in the beginning of some of these images was that there's really excessive space on the roadway today that it could be repurposed for other uses, and so as if there's any redesign of this roadway today, there won't be any loss of use for motor vehicles. Really, there will just be smaller scale repurposing of observed underutilized space through the corridor, which potentially would help. Potentially, if we could get some of these people who maybe can walk or bike and are choosing not to and to drive instead because of potential safety issues or other issues, that they don't do that today. Potentially, if they're not doing that in the future, you know, there'll be fewer vehicles on the roadway. So those who do need to use vehicles to get around have more space, less traffic, more parking, things like that. And so I don't want to ignore. We're not, we're not ignoring or
You've
deriding
been
vehicles.
encouraging, the whole presentation has been encouraging more walking use of the avenue, and walking as a, you know, as and cycling. That's a privilege, a gift of mobility that many people just take for granted. So encouraging a means of transportation or mobility that's not accessible to many people, especially during the winter months. I'm just concerned that there's been a vulnerable population that is totally neglected and not considered during this push for more walking or bicycling.
Your concerns are noted, and I just would like to reemphasize again that
Especially since people don't have
we will
choice.
not be removing any
Right.
accessibility for vehicles through this corridor.
Well, that's different than deliberate action that makes Grand Avenue or maintains it as accessible for those in wheelchairs. So I'd like to think that we can do better than that and be more considerate and make it a point to accommodate those where walking and cycling are, and yeah, be friendly for those where it's not an option.
Again, I hear your concern, and we will be very considerate of those folks who are having mobility challenges. The ADA Act requires us to construct right away that conforms to all users' needs. And one of the things we will definitely be looking at again is the accessibility specifically of our roadways and sidewalks. And so,
thank you. I can only imagine being wheelchair. My sister-in-law hearing something like this and not being able to walk. That solution or that component of this project doesn't. It's just an insult to someone in her position. So, you know, I appreciate that. I don't want to see things made more difficult for people that already don't have the gift of using their legs. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I just one more point. So I have communicated with a few people who have been in wheelchairs and using crutches. And one thing I think we do want to emphasize too is the crossing safety of those in wheelchairs and crutches and other sorts of ways that make it more difficult to get across the street are certainly something that we are emphasizing, I think, through this project. And one of the things, as I mentioned, specifically McAllister, is these mid-block crossings that have no accommodation for people in wheelchairs or other mobility issues. And so we'll be looking at ways to make these areas of our city more accessible. I would hope and think through this process rather than less accessible. So again, I appreciate that comment, and it is noted. Next, Scott, you've had your hand up for a little bit, so I want to jump over and hear what your question is or comment.
Hi, Joe, or Joseph, which do you prefer?
You can call me Joe. It's okay.
Okay, Joe. Hey, I'm here with Darren, who you met in the store the other day. We own wet paint. We had a couple of things that we didn't see information about. One is you started talking a little bit about business accessibility. Between us and Fratelloni, there's probably 10 trucks a week. Yeah, definitely a couple trucks a day of various size. So we're very interested in how that'll work for us. But something that comes out of a long history in this building, the building's about 110. And with something that's going to go down to the utility level and right up against the side of the building, we'd like to encourage the city to provide some pre-assessment, have some engineers over to look at foundations, maybe some monitoring, if not seismic monitors, inspections, and then a post as well. We expect that we will end up with some harm, but if we can get ahead of that, that will be better.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, so we will definitely be in close contact, I think, with everyone, especially those older buildings that go right up to the right-of-way line there, and that'll certainly be something we will be considering. And I would like to defer over to Pastor Chris real quick if he wants to speak specifically to engineering and things like that, since that's more his purview.
I think you hit it on the nose, Joe. We'll just want to coordinate with you. I know there's a few areaways, especially at Fratelloni's and just other accesses that we want to make sure we're not getting into. But in general, road construction near the zero setback buildings, these buildings are usually pretty good foundations. There may be some shaking, but as we construct through there, we do a variety of review and on our construction activities. But for the most part, we're pretty successful in not knocking anybody's building down. So we should be good, but we do want to coordinate with you.
Hey, Scott, would you don't mind a follow up on that? When you have
Thanks, Chris.
when you have trucks loading in and stuff, like, how is that? Do you utilize the median space, or do you utilize side roads?
We load from the back. We have a lot and right of way in the back. And so they are usually coming in from Grand onto Cambridge and then pulling onto our property behind. But our tenant at the tea shop, they have US Foods delivers from the median. And then I know that Fratelloni's has incredibly skilled drivers, and they bring them right in on Cambridge there alongside, because I don't think they have the same access at the back of their building that we have.
True, yeah, their building is right up to the back of the property line. Okay, thank you. I just want to, so I see one more hand up. MOA musician, I believe you asked a question earlier, but I just want to make sure that you didn't have any follow-ups. You still have your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, I can hear you.
Yep. My name is Norbert Nilabowski. I'm a resident over here in Lincoln. And just to follow up to that previous question we had about the traffic on Lincoln, we already see a lot of traffic from Mac in the morning and the late afternoon. A lot of high speeds and ignoring the stop sign at Lincoln and Wheeler. I called the St. Paul Police in the past, and they basically shrug their shoulders and say, well, there's not much we can do about it. So I'm really concerned. I think what you're proposing sounds really good and very interesting. I'm just concerned that Lincoln Avenue is going to turn into even more of a highway. And so I would just like to make sure that in your planning process with all of this, that the consideration of any sort of a detour would be pushed towards Summit and not toward Lincoln. We have a lot of young families here with young children, and I'm already concerned about the high amount of traffic that we get here, including the fact that I know that a lot of this the trucks that serve the businesses on Grand Avenue end up then coming down Lincoln. In fact, we've had semis coming down Lincoln, and obviously this is a residential street that wasn't built for that. So maybe we're going to be in the reconstruction queue for the future, just because I know that there's a lot of wear and tear being taken on the street. So I would just ask that as you're doing this planning, that you really consider how that's going to affect those of us here on Lincoln, because I can see it's already a problem in terms of the traffic and the speed, and I think it could just get worse. So I would hope that you can help us during the construction, but then also after the construction, trying to find some way to deal with the traffic issues that we're already seeing here. So thank you.
Thank you for that. That's good to know. Didn't know that big trucks were using Lincoln. That they shouldn't be doing that. So that's good to know that they're well, not good to know, but it's good good to know that that you've told me that. Okay, thank you, and I appreciate it. Yeah, when again on detours, again, we're pretty early, but we'll definitely be very, there'll be notices. We'll be coordinating closely on that, and so we'll you'll know more as we get closer to construction. Chip, I saw your hand up again. Did you have something else to
Yeah.
add?
Will McAllister Avenue and Cambridge and Wheeler be closed? The crossings of Grand be closed throughout the project?
Thanks for the question, Chris.
To vehicles.
We don't have any staging plan, nor do we have any detour plan available. That will come very late in the construction design and into construction. So likely the spring of 2024 is when we'll start sharing and talking about the detour plans.
Okay.
Heather, you got your hand up again? Another comment?
Yes, thank you. So we saw what happened to the businesses on University when there was restricted access to the storefronts and the businesses. It's just a mass flight and permanent closures. So I know that there was major, business loss when down at the bike store when the city worked on the sidewalk and the street there, and that was just for one block. What are your plans to do differently this time so that there isn't a total flight and disruption to? I mean, it sounds inevitable that it is going to be more difficult to access these storefronts. And the special thing about Grand is that a lot of these businesses depend on walkability and access, storefront access, to use them. So what's going to be done differently so we don't recreate another University where all the businesses close forever?
Good point. That's a very good point, Heather. I appreciate the comment.
How we compensate them? Like it's with inflation, cost of living, higher than it's been in over 40 years. Every penny matters now. So my heart goes out to these special places that are going to be disrupted. Absolutely. But what's going to be different than what happened with University?
So thanks for the question, comment, and I really want to put to say we really do at the city hear that, and we really do care about that. So again, last week I actually went out to every single business around the corridor, and I introduced myself to people who were there, gave my contact information, and I really want to be open and transparent and working closely with the businesses as we kind of move through this process again, because there will be some disruption, there will be some, there will be some months of reduced access, but we certainly are. I think, I guess I won't, I haven't been in the city that long, so I haven't gone through one of these projects with the city. But I'd hope we would ensure that there always be access to the businesses. It might not always be the prettiest, but there will certainly always be a way to access these businesses. But I will also want to defer to Chris a little bit, kind of about particularly our standards and practices as it comes to access for during construction projects. Chrissy, anything to add there?
You nailed it pretty well. We work in an urban environment. We live in an urban environment. We try to provide as much flexibility and access to the property owners, whether they're businesses, whether they're private homeowners, whether they're apartments, to provide some access. There will be interruptions. Construction of a street does take some time, especially the utilities and placements. However, as Joseph's doing a great job, and I appreciate this, of reaching out and getting contact information with our business owners along the corridor and being able to work with them to find some semblance of, do you have alternate access? How is your trucking? How is your deliveries done? What does the front door? When are your prime periods of work? These types of questions we won't be able to address and find the perfect solution for everything, but we do go through a substantive review, almost always maintaining access points for the the properties that are right up against the right-of-way line, so that they can get people in and out their front door.
Well, you guys have iterated so and very accurate point that it's hard enough to access these businesses as Grand Avenue currently is. And the difference between residences and the businesses is that those residences don't depend on customers coming there frequently, especially during their summertime is the time where Grand Avenue businesses generate their sales to survive the winter. So what are some examples, some concrete examples of action that's going to take place so we don't end up with a recreating University on Grand or just mass closures?
I would ask the question of what you mean by recreating University on Grand. University was a substantive long-term project. We weren't quite the same situation. This is 4 blocks. We have cross streets that we're able to maintain access. Is there something specific that you would want to point to regarding that?
Yeah, when it's difficult to access a storefront, it's going to hurt their bottom line, period. It's already
understood.
It's the traffic, the parking limits. Scott, feel free to join me here. It makes it hard as it is for customers to access these businesses. So
do you have a specific business on the corridor that you want me to take a look at?
I am grateful to have any businesses that are still here on Grand Avenue. Vacancies are at an all-time high. We're still coming out of the COVID crisis. So I don't want Grand to become a dead zone like University did, because it's the customers it's too much of a hassle to get to the storefronts. And I don't want to discriminate. They're all valuable. Contribute to our community and the vibrancy and the livelihood of what makes living near Grand and working on Grand and having a business there so special.
I appreciate your input on that. Thank you.
University became a dead zone.
That's that's all. Appreciate your concerns, and we also do share concerns about the business in our city as well. And so again, we will do everything we can, I think, to accommodate through the construction process. And again, I'm very available, and if anyone specifically to specific businesses, I'd reiterate, please reach out, and we can talk more offline. I do want to get to a comment that Julie asked a question in the chat about bike lanes. So she also noted that Summit Avenues is obviously, as I'm sure we're all well aware, that there's pretty extensive planning going on for Summit Avenue and the bike facilities on Summit Avenue. And I can say, I would say it's going to be very likely there will not be consideration of bike facilities on Grand Avenue. I think the idea for Grand Avenue is to emphasize it as a destination. And so, we will want to see biking coming to when people bike to the avenue, but I don't think any specific bike accommodation will likely be on the final product of this. I can never never say never. We still haven't got a preferred concept design yet, but I would say it's likely that there won't be bicycle facilities on Grand Avenue itself. I got a question again from Emily. So contact information. So my contact information, I'll put it up here. It's right here. It's on our project webpage, stpaul.gov/Grand Avenue. You'll have my email address on there. These slides will also be on the webpage as well. They're on there right now. If you want to go and you can look at these slides yourself and kind of analyze these, and you've got my email address, my phone number on here. And again, there's no problem, too small or large, that I'm not willing to discuss and talk about. I do see we've got a hand up here. I just want to say, Emma, did I answer your hand up with that the comment, or is there additional? That is, I got you. Gary has a comment, says we also live in Lincoln Avenue and trucks come down at Billiards every day. I appreciate again that comment about the trucks on Lincoln, that and on University Avenue. I do want to reiterate, I think what Chris said earlier is so, the idea here is to kind of get this done in 1 year. It's a pretty small stretch of roadway. It's about 4 blocks. And so, whereas the university project obviously was a multi-year large scale effort, but even still, we any business closing, we don't want to see that. So we will definitely do all we can to make sure that we don't see the same effects we've seen on other large scale projects within the city or in other cities. But again, this is a pretty large scale project, and so we can only do everything we can. But again, we will do all we can to limit the headaches and limit the impact, and hopefully accommodate as much as we can. Oh, Lisa, sorry, I must have missed your question. Sorry about that. If pedestrian bump outs are installed as they are on East Grand Avenue, the corner properties pile their sidewalk snow on them, making it impossible for drivers to see pedestrians trying to cross Avenue to pedestrians are further out. How will this be addressed if the same bump outs are put in? I would say generally the policy for snow removal is to have the entire paved surface have snow removed from that surface and to not pile up on those bump outs. I do know you're talking about. I am a frequent walker, biker, driver, and so I do understand some of these snow concerns. We certainly do what we can in operations to limit these issues, especially on these corners and safety issues like that. And so, when they do come up, I think it's worth having a ring to the city and let us know that there's safety concerns on any particular bump outs that maybe are so high, that snow pile is so high that you couldn't see a human being crossing them. That is definitely something we want to address, and we hope to address, because again, really safety is paramount, I think, and crossing safety too for pedestrians is very important, especially in the winter when their visibility is challenged in different ways. And if you have any follow up on that, Elisa, please let me know. I'm moving on to the second question. To look Grand Avenue changes to be like Selby, east of Dale, the buses can't or don't go in far enough to reach the curb to pick up drop off riders, and they just park the bus in the drive lane until moving again. what has Metro Transit said for suggestion comments for Grand Avenue? So I would say, specific to this, Selby is a pretty unique street in just how constrained it is. And so I think the issue where you see buses kind of in the drive lane as they pick up and drop off is less of an issue here. We've been communicating pretty closely with Metro Transit to specific to 63, and there's room for the buses to pull out, and the idea here would be, even with the bump outs, there'd still be room for the buses to pull in and out at their station locations. So I think the idea would be to maintain enough room for those buses so they can fully get out of traffic and they're not actually blocking through traffic while they're picking up and dropping off riders. However, certain things can happen where that is a potentiality, I would say, but we are closely working with Metro Transit specific to Route 63, and to be able to fully accommodate buses and have them pull in and out completely of the roadway and pick up and drop off passengers through this corridor. And again, if you have any follow-up, Lisa, please let me know. We got a couple hands up again. Chip, you got your hand up again, looks like. Chip, if you got your hand up, if you got something to say, the floor is yours. I'd be muted if.
I'm sorry, I forgot to.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. That's
the discussion of access to businesses made me think a little bit about the greater importance alleys will probably have during that year of construction. And I was thinking also about the rather bizarre system St. Paul has for snow removal in alleys. I'm wondering, when alleys become more important during that year, is there anything you can do to make them more pedestrian and vehicle friendly?
Chris, any insight on potential changes in operations during construction projects like that, potentially of maybe plowing adjacent streets quicker, or alleys quicker, anything like that? I'm not aware of.
Typically, we won't be in the conditions where snow is on the ground. That's the general hope. We want to have our site buttoned up and pretty good before the snow flies. Generally, we don't try to encourage anybody from using alleys. That's the slow routes for specific access to properties. That's the intent of the alleys. It's generally 10 miles per hour. Desired speed at that, if that. So in general, my experience has been to try to keep people out of the alleyways that are cutting through corridors or around corridors of construction. And that's typically how we treat them.
Yeah, it's Scott, and I was just going to add that a lot of our trucks wouldn't be able to go down the alley because of the wire overhangs.
Okay. Are you thinking then that front doors for the businesses will continue to be open throughout, that they won't have to let pedestrians come in through the back?
We will work with our different, each business, each property is a little bit different. If they have an access from the back door, that when we're pouring the sidewalk in front of them, they have access, alternative access, that would be great for us to try to utilize. In general, we try to maintain at least a gravel or dirt path to the front doors for everybody, ramp it up with ramps and etc. It's not a perfect scenario, but in general, there is going to be some interruptions, and we will want to work with the property owners to maintain fire access and ADA compliant access as well. And what if they have secondary access? That's a lot of times that is a great opportunity for us to utilize.
Thank you.
Gary, I see you got your hand up. Feel free to unmute and jump in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yep, can hear you, yes.
Hey, I'm sorry, this is Dawn, Dawn H. My husband and I are sharing a phone together. We didn't have a laptop, but I've been listening, and very intently, Joe, and thank you for all the information you've been giving us about what the intention is here. I'm not sure if I've heard anything about it. I do live very close. I do live on Lincoln Avenue, and we do have the trucks going down almost daily from the business deliveries going down our street. And I can name off Cisco and a few others that do their deliveries and then come right down my street. So it is a problem, and I don't know how you'll be able to control that. I also had a business on University that didn't make it through the transportation construction phase. And so and then of course also, you know, the businesses that burned on, University and around. So we've had very challenging times in our area. We've had, multiple break-ins. We've had our cars have all had their catalytic converters stolen. We have more crime in our area than we've ever had before, and we've lived there 40 years. So I just want to know if is this a view that the city is taking that's going to make our area safer for us to live, more convenient for us to live in, more convenient to be able to travel and access? And what I really am hearing is you started out by attacking anyone that would use a vehicle. I think that's deplorable. I've lived there 40 years, so I'm old enough to where I've gone from being able to ride a bike or being able to walk everywhere and not have to worry about, being able to access everything. Parking is a problem. And this area that you're talking about, I drive it every day. I don't see fast drivers. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen speeding drivers. If anything, they're aggravated trying to get around things that are impending their way, maybe like a truck or deliveries or things like that. But there's very slow driving. 25, most people can barely keep their cars crawling at 25, but I commend most drivers, they do. I try to keep it at that level, but I don't want to be shamed for having to use that. And I don't know that McAllister was meant for only mass transit or just a trolley cars. I don't believe that. I've lived here long enough to know that, you know, cars have been a safe way of transportation. Pedestrians have their right to walk and stay safe, but you have to look. I can fix my car, but I can't fix you if you get hit. So this attitude about we've got to, make all the cars the villains. No, thank you. It's our right to have a vehicle now. As long as and speaking about green, let's stop tearing down all the trees up and down Grand Avenue. It looks naked. If you're going to do more of that, then let's talk about green. Let's be green. Plant trees as soon as you take them down. I lost 8 trees between my house and my temperature went up 10 degrees. This summer I've had to have air conditioning for the first time. It changed everything. So don't speak green and then tear down all our trees. So I think we really need to question where this motivation is going. We have a nice thing on Grand Avenue. I don't want to see it spoiled. If we can improve it, great. But let's don't ruin the businesses that are there that are struggling already. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Don. One thing on the high speed cars, so that's something that I've been told from various people I've talked to. That's not something that I've personally haven't been going up and down Grand, seeing if cars are going fast. So I that's just just relaying what I've heard from other people. So but I appreciate the counterpoint that you haven't. So that's great to hear that if you haven't noticed speeding vehicles, because we don't want that. So that's good to hear. And I will say again, we aren't here to attack cars or to remove their access at all. I think through this process, I think it's to hopefully emphasize and help all modes of traffic through this corridor, and to really make it something that everyone can, I think, equitably use and use well and easily. So I appreciate those comments, and specific trees as well. I agree with you that the too many trees get cut down too easily in a lot of different places. I've worked in different cities, I've worked for different states, and I've seen many projects
Yeah.
where trees are they're the last consideration. I think that that shouldn't be the last consideration in a project. And so, me personally, I think as we go through this process, I definitely will be advocating to save everything we can, and and through this process, if we can potentially add a little more space in the boulevard for those trees that we do plant through this process to grow and be healthy and to actually be nice, to have a nice canopy and things like this. I think that's a great opportunity. I think through this corridor, and so I do agree with you on on some of these points, and I do hear you on all of them. And so I appreciate your comments. And again, I don't want to come off as seen as attacking one mode of transportation. Nothing. I think the idea is to hopefully encourage and balance all modes of transportation and make them all comfortable and feasible. And so appreciate your comments. MOA, again, you've got your hand up still. I just want to make sure you don't have any last thoughts at all, if it's just up still.
Sorry about that. Shouldn't be. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to make sure. And Don, same with you. If you do you have any more follow up, or are you I see we got a few more chats here from Heather. You began the first half emphasizing pedestrians.
Thank you, Joe. This is Dawn. Thank you. Thanks for the follow-up.
Yeah, I appreciate all the
Yeah,
comments. And
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't want to make you be the villain. I don't want, we have so many modes and so many needs in our city. And for people to have to make that choice and to feel like they're, making a bad choice by using their car. I don't want to do that. There's no reason to villainize that. And I think we have to just integrate everything to work together. And so I appreciate any consideration you'll have on that. But I do know that the speed limit on Grand is very slow. If we're only one lane on either side, you can't really speed if you're following the lane of traffic. And so I can give it to you as a 40-year citizen that it's very slow on Grand. So you don't use that if you're trying to speed. So that's not an issue. But thank you and good luck with everything. I think we should reach out probably more to the people that live on the community, the neighbors, and see how they're impacted and see how they're going to be able to survive and live and function with this going on too. So I'd like to see more of that public addressed where we can all come together. I've lived there. I heard nothing about this. Someone called me and said I should attend this and look it up. I'm not always aware of what the city is planning for the city, but this one is, it sounds like it's going to be a $7 million addition to Grand. I know that last year I tripped in potholes on the other end of Grand and I've been doing physical therapy for a year. I broke my kneecap and just walking across the street. So, maybe the potholes might be something we would address first before worrying about making more scooter places or whatever. I was walking because I thought it was the correct thing to do that night to a meeting at Dixie's with some of our city council representatives, and I tripped and fell in a hole in the middle of the street. So, it can be that dangerous, anywhere you are. So we all have to be responsible for our own safety, but anyway, good luck with everything, Joe. I'd like to hear more input and more out, inclusion for those of us that live here every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Just one quick point. I appreciate the comments, and I'm sorry that you did trip and hurt yourself. We'd never want to see that. That's too bad, and I hope you're feeling better. I will say on the project itself. So for this open house, we sent out mailers again to every property within 500 feet of the project, and so that covers a couple blocks outside of the project. But outside that, we've posted on social media a few times in the past week. We've got the project webpage, so we're definitely trying to, as much as we can, get it out there. And so apologies if you weren't aware of that, but we will certainly be doing this probably throughout the summer, so it's probably won't be the last time you hear my voice. So I do appreciate the comments, and we are at the time limit. But Heather, I see you got your hand up, so I'll give you the last
Thank you.
go here.
Speaking of the environment, I really appreciate Don bringing that up. I'm devastated to see our mature trees being cut down. Grand does look naked. Our urban forests contribute to our quality of life and so many things, and sound barriers. What are our plans to incorporate trees, greenery, anything in the absence of what's going on Grand right now? And something that when the city chopped down 8 trees on our corner alone, they replaced them with little twigs that actually died. So they weren't, they had to be propped up, and I guess people's dogs, whatever, just enough height to legs were enough to take out these little trees, these jokes of trees, when we had majestic 40-foot tall, mature, beautiful green trees that gave us sound and temperature protection and made a beautiful place. Some privacy, some safety. What are the plans for greenery and mitigating the carbon footprint from this project?
So good question. That'll be the final question. So on trees specifically, I think I want to reiterate. So the trees that we lost on Grand, on closer to Wheeler and Fairview, those were all ash trees, and as we know, emerald ash borer is kind of running through all of our ash trees, and I'll probably get to all of them at some point. So moving forward in the future, the idea is to diversify plantings, right? So we're not planting the same exact species of trees down rows of a street, and so if there is a new blight that comes, it kind of wipes them all out at once. That's something that we, in the past, when these trees were planted in the 50s, 60s, earlier, they didn't really understand that concept, and so they liked the trees because of the canopy and the shade cover and things like that. And those are all great features and things we want to encourage, we want to have in our streets. But we do need to be kind of that are us. We also need to diversify kind of those types of trees. So if one gets sick, it can't infect all the other trees next to it. And
we
so
learned about that in elementary school when we were taught about the potato famine in Ireland. That's what happens with monoculture.
yes.
So it's the replacement, how long for the replacement, cutting down such mature, huge trees and then replacing them with twigs, or waiting, you and I will be long gone before something has the opportunity to grow to that extent again. So that's just a trade-off. Horrible. So anything like that, besides twigs?
So specific to tree maturity when they're planting, I have actually asked this question before to our forestry department. I haven't. I definitely have been curious about that as well, as kind of how, when you're actually replanting trees, can you plant more mature trees so there's a little more a little more oomph there than the ones you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. I certainly will be exploring that, I think, through this process and seeing how, it's the possibility of that is. I do know that the cost of more mature trees, planting them, definitely does ramp up quite a bit, quite quickly. However, I don't know the intricacies of what that would mean or what that would entail. But I do know that is something that I think as we move through this, I am willing to look into further and see how feasible that may be. I do. Chris, is there any follow-up on potentially adding more mature trees to a project, or is there any sort of standard procedure on that?
Yeah, I can. We could definitely wax poetically about the intricacies of our urban forest and how do we make trees, or how do we provide enough opportunity for the trees to survive. The first thing we're gonna really need to nail down is our cross section. How much space do we have in the boulevard? That'll give us our opportunity areas for the trees. With regard to the trees that we put back into play, after with the consideration of the urban forest, trees are cut down, we regenerate, rejuvenate and add new trees on every project that I've ever been on. The biggest scenarios that you see with planting trees is that you need to find the right trees for the specific environment. You don't necessarily know what is going to be the right species or the right tree, even so, until that's been in that environment and given an opportunity to grow. When the larger the tree, the more mature the tree is, when you transplant them, the more likely they are to shock and die. So the 1.5-inch trees that we put out there, generally they have the best opportunity to survive and adapt to the new environment and in 10 years be a 10-inch tree. When you put in a 4-inch tree, it takes them 4 years to just reacclimate to that area, typically a year for every inch of the width of the tree. And then it starts growing again. So in 4 years, your 1-inch tree is going to be bigger than that 4-inch tree that you put out there. The expense of it, of course, is always part of the project consideration. The root ball that you put in there for a larger tree is definitely larger than a small 1-inch caliper tree. So the root base can go different directions if we provide them with different opportunities. So that's probably getting pretty technical there. But if you have a 4x4 area that you need for a larger tree, you only need a 2x2 area for a smaller tree, and then it can go along the boulevard length and start to have new root growth there. Whereas the root growth that you have to cut off to fit it into the boulevard for a larger tree, it shocks it even more. Again, I'm going to go all night if you keep me going, so I probably should stop and see if there's anything I should be adding there or specific questions.
Well, thanks, Chris. So I will say for tonight, we are running a little long, but it's a great conversation. I really appreciate everyone is still here and everything that everyone has said about this project. And again, my contact information is on the screen. Otherwise, if you don't see a screen, if you're on a phone or something else, you can go to stpaul.gov/Grand Avenue and you will be on our project page, and all my contact information will be on that page. And this presentation that I gave today will be on this page as well. So if you want to look at this for your own purposes, you can certainly do that. Otherwise, again, I will want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and discussing a little bit about this project. Very lively discussion. I appreciate everyone here and all the words that were spoken. So again, I just want to thank you, everybody. And if you want to keep the conversation going with me, feel free to reach out, email, phone, and I will get back to you or talk to you more then. But otherwise, I just want to say have a good night, everybody. And thanks again.